Emma and David's life together seemed idyllic. They lived in a charming apartment nestled in the heart of the city, with a bakery right below their building that filled the air with the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread every morning. The bakery was a favorite spot for them both. David loved their cinnamon rolls, and Emma often joked that the smell alone could convince her to go downstairs. But what was once a place of shared joy began to take on a different meaning for Emma. She had always been the one to go down for their morning pastries, and over time, she found herself lingering longer than necessary. It wasn't just the bread that kept her there, it was Luca, the charming and handsome baker with flour-dusted hands and a disarming smile. It started innocently enough. "Good morning, Mrs. Davis." Luca greeted her warmly one day, handing her a croissant before she could even ask. "The usual?" Emma smiled, feeling a flutter in her chest. "You know me too well, Luca." He winked. "Hard to forget a face like yours." His flattery was casual, but Emma couldn't ignore the warmth it brought. She found herself looking forward to her trips to the bakery more and more, her interactions with Luca brightening her otherwise routine days. David noticed the change but attributed it to her newfound enthusiasm for the bakery's offerings. "You've been bringing home extra pastries lately," he said one morning, biting into a buttery croissant. "Not that I'm complaining." Emma laughed nervously. "I guess I've just been in the mood to spoil us." David smiled, oblivious to the undercurrent in her words. The turning point came one afternoon when Emma stopped by the bakery during a slow hour. The shop was empty, and Luca was wiping down the counter. He looked up, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Emma," he said, abandoning the cloth. "What a nice surprise. I thought I'd grab something for tea later," she said, her voice wavering slightly. Luca stepped around the counter, closing the distance between them. "You don't just come here for the pastries, do you?" he asked, his tone playful but probing. Emma's breath caught. I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," Luca murmured, his hand brushing hers. The tension between them was electric, and before she could think, their lips met. The kiss was intense, a collision of suppressed desires that left Emma reeling. What began as a single impulsive moment soon became a dangerous routine. Each visit to the bakery became an excuse for stolen moments with Luca, their connection growing deeper with every encounter. Emma told herself she could keep it under control, that no one would ever find out. But secrets have a way of unraveling. One evening, as Emma and David prepared dinner, he mentioned the bakery. "Luca seems like a nice guy," he said casually. "He's always so friendly when I stop by." Emma's stomach dropped. You've been to the bakery?" "Yeah, a couple of times," David said. "I ran into him in the hallway, and he invited me down. Showed me how they make those amazing cinnamon rolls." Emma forced a smile, her mind racing. Had Luca said anything? Did David suspect? The next time Emma saw Luca, she was on edge. "David mentioned visiting the bakery," she said, her voice low. Luca grinned. "He's a nice guy. Didn't say much about you, though." Emma frowned. "Luca, this is serious. If he finds out..." "Relax," Luca said, his tone soothing. "Your secret's safe with me." But Emma wasn't so sure. The lines they had crossed felt increasingly precarious, and every moment with Luca seemed to tighten the noose around her double life. As Emma's guilt grew, so did David's curiosity. He began noticing small changes. The way Emma lingered in the mornings, the way her face lit up when she mentioned the bakery. He brushed it off at first, but a seed of doubt had been planted. One evening, as Emma stepped out to pick up a treat, David decided to follow her. He waited in the shadows outside the bakery, watching as she entered. Through the glass, he saw her greet Luca with a familiarity that set his teeth on edge. When he saw them embrace, something inside him snapped. David stormed into the bakery, the bell above the door jangling violently. Emma and Luca sprang apart, their faces pale. "David," Emma stammered. "I can explain." But David wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on Luca, his fists clenched. Without a word, he grabbed the nearest display stand and sent it crashing to the floor, sending pastries flying. "You think you can mess with my wife?" David roared, advancing on Luca. Luca raised his hands defensively. "David, calm down. Let's talk about this." But David was beyond reason. As Emma shouted for him to stop, he grabbed a tray of baguettes and hurled it across the room, the chaos escalating. The sound of sirens broke through the commotion, and moments later, the police arrived. They separated the three of them, the bakery now a disaster zone of smashed shelves and scattered pastries. As the officers questioned them, Emma felt the weight of her actions crashing down. She had thought she could control the situation, but now everything was spiraling out of control. The aftermath of David's outburst at the bakery was immediate and severe. The police managed to calm the situation, but the damage to the bakery and everyone involved was undeniable. Luca stood quietly, his usually confident demeanor shaken. Emma could barely look at her husband, her face pale and her hands trembling. "This isn't over," David spat as the officers escorted him outside to cool off. Emma and Luca exchanged a glance, but neither spoke. The bakery was a mess, and the tension between them had reached a breaking point. The next morning, Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her untouched coffee. David had spent the night on the couch, the silence between them deafening. She knew she had to say something, but the weight of her guilt made it impossible to start. Finally, David walked into the room, his expression hard. "So, do you want to explain?" he asked, his voice icy. Emma swallowed hard. "David, She hesitated, searching for the right words. "It was a mistake. I never meant for any of this to happen." David laughed bitterly. "A mistake? That's what you call sneaking around with the baker right under my nose." Emma's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know how to stop. It got out of hand." "Out of hand?" David snapped. "Emma, you betrayed me. You made a fool out of me." She couldn't meet his gaze. "I'm sorry," she whispered. David stood there for a moment, his fists clenching and unclenching. Then, without another word, he grabbed his keys and stormed out of the apartment. Emma sat in the silence that followed, her mind racing. She knew she had hurt David deeply, but she couldn't undo what had happened. Part of her wondered if she even wanted to try. Her feelings for Luca were complicated, tangled up in the thrill of something forbidden and the comfort he had provided when her marriage had started to feel stale. She needed to talk to Luca, to figure out what to do next. Gathering her courage, she headed downstairs to the bakery. The bakery was closed, closed for repairs, sign taped to the door. Emma knocked, and after a moment, Luca appeared. He looked tired, his usual spark dimmed. "Emma," he said, opening the door just enough for her to slip inside. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." "I had to," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I needed to see you." Luca nodded, leading her to a small table in the corner, far from the wreckage David had caused. "What now?" Luca asked, his tone weary. "Your husband knows. The bakery's in shambles. Where do we go from here?" Emma hesitated. She had no answers, only questions swirling in her mind. "I don't know," she admitted. "I didn't think it would get this far. I didn't think—" She trailed off, tears filling her eyes. Luca reached across the table, taking her hand. "I never meant to complicate your life, Emma. But I meant everything I said to you. I care about you." His words brought both comfort and confusion. Emma pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. "I need time to think," she said. "I don't know what I want anymore." Luca nodded, watching her go without protest. Meanwhile, David found himself at a bar across town, nursing a whiskey and stewing in his anger. He couldn't shake the image of Emma and Luca together, the betrayal cutting deeper than he thought possible. As he sat there, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Curious, he opened it. The message read, "David, you don't know me, but I know what happened with Emma and Luca. There's more to the story than you realize. Meet me tomorrow at the park by the bakery. Noon." David frowned, his mind racing. Who could it be? And what did they know? Despite his better judgment, he decided to go. He needed answers, and if someone had more information, he wanted to hear it. The next day, David arrived at the park, scanning the area for the mysterious messenger. A woman approached him, her face partially obscured by large sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. "David?" she asked, her voice low. "Yeah," he replied warily. "Who are you?" The woman glanced around before sitting on a nearby bench. "I work at the bakery. My name's Elena. And I think you need to know what's really going on." David's stomach churned. "What do you mean?" Elena leaned closer. "Luca has a pattern. Emma isn't the first. And she won't be the last." David stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "You're saying he preys on women?" Elena nodded. "He's charming, sure. But he knows exactly what he's doing. He thrives on the thrill of it. I thought you deserved to know." David sat back, his mind spinning. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. Luca had made a game of seduction, and David had unwittingly become another pawn in his twisted play. Back at the apartment, Emma paced nervously. She had no idea where David was or what he was thinking. When he finally walked through the door, his expression was unreadable. "David," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but cold. "And this time, I want the whole truth." David's demand for the truth caught Emma off guard. She stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "The whole truth?" she asked hesitantly. "Every word of it," David replied, his tone resolute. Emma sat down on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. "I don't even know where to start." David crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "Start with why." She took a deep breath. I felt invisible, David. You've been so focused on work, on everything else, and I felt like I didn't matter anymore. Then Luca, he paid attention to me. He made me feel seen." David's jaw tightened. "So, instead of talking to me, you ran to him? That's your excuse?" "It's not an excuse," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you. But it wasn't about you. It was about me and my insecurities." David shook his head, pacing the room. "And how long has this been going on? How many times have you lied to my face?" "It started a few months ago," Emma admitted. "But it's over now. I ended it. I swear." David stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Over? After what I saw yesterday, you expect me to believe that?" Emma's silence spoke volumes. David let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. "You don't get it, do you?" he said. "This isn't just about what you did. It's about the trust you destroyed." As the conversation reached a stalemate, Emma realized she needed to take a different approach. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this," she said earnestly. "Therapy, counseling, whatever you need. Just tell me what to do." David's expression softened slightly, but the hurt remained. "It's not that simple, Emma. I don't know if this is something we can fix." The uncertainty in his voice was a knife to her heart. Emma knew she had a long road ahead, but she was determined to fight for their marriage. Meanwhile, David couldn't shake the conversation he'd had with Elena. Her warning about Luca played on a loop in his mind. If what she said was true, Emma wasn't the first woman Luca had charmed, and she likely wouldn't be the last. Driven by a mix of anger and curiosity, David decided to confront Luca directly. That evening, he waited until the bakery's lights dimmed and knocked on the back door. Luca opened it, his face tightening when he saw who it was. "David," Luca said cautiously. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," David said, stepping inside uninvited. Luca closed the door behind him, crossing his arms. "About Emma," David said flatly. "And whatever game you think you're playing." Luca's expression hardened. "I'm not playing any games. Don't insult my intelligence," David snapped. "I know about you. I know Emma's not the first woman you've done this to. So why don't you cut the act and tell me the truth? For a moment, Luca said nothing. Then he let out a humorless laugh. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, Emma's not the first. But she's the one who kept coming back. Don't put all of this on me. David's fist clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. So, what is it? Some kind of sick thrill for you? Breaking up marriages? Luca shrugged. I don't force anyone to do anything. They come to me because something's missing. If it wasn't me, it would be someone else. David's restraint snapped. He grabbed Luca by the collar, slamming him against the wall. You stay away from my wife, David growled. If I see you near her again, you'll regret it. Luca didn't flinch, his calm demeanor infuriating. You think scaring me off will fix your marriage? Good luck with that. David released him, disgusted, and stormed out of the bakery. Emma was waiting when David returned home. She stood in the doorway, her face pale with worry. Where were you? She asked. Talking to Luca, David said, brushing past her. Emma's heart sank. What did you say? Enough, David replied. He knows to stay away. Emma followed him into the living room, desperate to make amends. David, please. I'm sorry. I know I've hurt you, but I want to fix this. Tell me how to fix this. David turned to her, his eyes filled with pain. I don't know if you can, Emma. But if you're serious, then you'll have to prove it. The next few days were tense. David kept his distance, and Emma threw herself into trying to rebuild his trust. She deleted Luca's number, avoided the bakery, and suggested they attend couples counseling. Slowly, David began to soften, though the wounds were far from healed. But just as they began to take tentative steps toward reconciliation, a letter arrived in the mail. It was addressed to David, written in an unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper that read, You don't know the whole truth about Emma. Meet me at the cafe on Main Street tomorrow at 3 p.m. if you want answers. David stared at the note, his stomach twisting. He had thought the worst was behind him, but it seemed there were still secrets waiting to be uncovered. David couldn't ignore the letter. Despite every fiber of his being warning him to let it go, the need for answers burned too brightly. At 3 p.m. the next day, he found himself at the cafe on Main Street, scanning the room for whoever had sent the note. A woman waved him over to a secluded booth in the corner. She looked familiar, and as he approached, recognition dawned. Elena? He said, sitting down. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice low. We need to talk about Luca and Emma. There's more going on than you know. David's jaw tightened. What more could there be? I already know she cheated on me with him. Elena shook her head. It's not just Emma. Luca has a pattern. He targets women, married women, and uses them for his own gain. But this time, it's worse. David frowned. Worse how? Elena hesitated before sliding a folder across the table. He's been blackmailing some of them. Emma, she might be his next target. David opened the folder, his stomach churning as he skimmed through the documents. Photos, messages, and bank records painted a clear picture of Luca's manipulative schemes. He'd seduced several women in the past, extracting money or favors under the threat of exposing their affairs. Why are you telling me this? David asked, his voice tense. Because I've seen enough lives ruined by him, Elena said. I didn't want to stay silent this time. And I care about what happens to Emma. She doesn't deserve to be another one of his victims. That evening, David confronted Emma with the folder. She was sitting on the couch, nervously flipping through a magazine when he walked in. We need to talk, he said, dropping the folder onto the coffee table. Emma stared at it, her face pale. What is this? It's everything Elena told me about Luca, David said. He's been blackmailing women. Were you going to be next? Emma's hands trembled as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the contents. Tears welled up as the weight of her choices came crashing down. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear, David. He never asked me for anything like that. But he could have. David said, his voice sharp. And you gave him the power to do it. Emma broke down, burying her face in her hands. I was so stupid. I thought he cared about me. David sighed, his anger mixing with a deep sadness. We need to end this, Emma. Completely. If there's even a chance he could hurt you or our family, we have to shut him down. Emma looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. How? The next day, David and Emma met with Elena to devise a plan. With her help, they gathered evidence and contacted a lawyer to prepare a case against Luca. The goal was to expose his schemes and ensure he couldn't hurt anyone else. But Luca wasn't going down without a fight. When he caught wind of their plans, he confronted Emma outside their apartment building. What are you doing, Emma? He demanded, his voice low and menacing. You think you can just walk away from this? Emma stood her ground, her fear overridden by anger. I'm done with you, Luca. And so is every other woman you've hurt. You won't get away with this. Luca smirked, though his eyes flashed with uncertainty. You don't know what you're getting into. David appeared at the door then, his presence a silent warning. Luca hesitated before backing off, but the encounter left Emma shaken. As the case against Luca gained traction, David and Emma's relationship remained strained but began to show signs of repair. They attended counseling sessions, where they confronted their issues with honesty and vulnerability. Emma admitted to feeling neglected, while David acknowledged that he had taken her for granted. I'm not excusing what I did, Emma said during one session. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even when I didn't show it. David looked at her, his expression softened. I know. And I'm trying to believe that we can get past this. But it's going to take time. The climax came when Luca was arrested after the evidence against him was presented to the authorities. Several women came forward, corroborating Elena's claims. Emma's involvement in exposing him helped her find a sense of redemption, though the scars of her choices remained. One evening, after the dust had settled, David and Emma sat together on their balcony, overlooking the city. Do you think we can really move forward from this? Emma asked, her voice tentative. David took her hand, squeezing it gently. I think we can try. And that's a start. They sat in silence, the distant hum of the city below them. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope. Months passed after Luca's arrest, and life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The bakery remained closed, its empty storefront a constant reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. For David and Emma, rebuilding their marriage was a painstaking process. Every step forward was accompanied by the lingering weight of doubt and regret. Counseling sessions became their lifeline. With the guidance of their therapist, they learned to communicate more openly and honestly. David confronted his own shortcomings, recognizing how his emotional distance had contributed to the cracks in their relationship. I'm not saying what you did was justified, David said during one session. But I know I failed to make you feel valued. I won't let that happen again. Emma's voice was steady but filled with emotion. I should have talked to you. I should have fought for us instead of running away. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Their shared commitment to healing gave them hope, though the journey was far from easy. One evening, David surprised Emma with dinner on their balcony. The table was set with candles, and the smell of her favorite pasta filled the air. As they sat together under the stars, the atmosphere felt lighter than it had in months. I've been thinking, David said, twirling his fork in the pasta. Maybe we should take a trip. Just the two of us. A chance to reconnect. Emma's eyes lit up. I'd love that. Where were you thinking? Somewhere quiet, David replied. No distractions. Just us. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma allowed herself to hope for a better future. The following weekend, they packed their bags and drove to a small cabin in the mountains. Surrounded by nature, they spent their days hiking, cooking together, and talking, really talking. Without the noise of the city and the shadows of their past looming over them, they found themselves rediscovering the love that had brought them together in the first place. Remember when we used to do this all the time? Emma asked one evening as they sat by the fireplace, a glass of wine in her hand. David chuckled. Before life got in the way? Yeah. We'd sit for hours, just enjoying each other's company. I want that back, Emma said softly. I want us back. David reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. We'll get there. One step at a time. Their time in the mountains proved to be a turning point. By the time they returned to the city, they felt more connected than they had in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were walking it together. David even suggested they adopt a new routine to keep their bond strong. They started having weekly date nights, alternating who planned them. One week, Emma organized a cozy movie night at home. The next, David surprised her with tickets to a local theater production. These small acts of care and thoughtfulness began to rebuild the foundation of their marriage. One afternoon, as they walked past the bakery's shuttered storefront, Emma paused. It's strange, she said, her voice contemplative. How something so small can ripple out and change everything. David slipped his arm around her shoulders. What matters is how we move forward from it. And I think we're doing okay. Emma smiled, leaning into him. Better than okay. As the months turned into years, the memories of their tumultuous time with Luca faded, replaced by new experiences and a stronger bond. They weren't perfect, but they were committed to each other in a way that felt deeper than before. Their love, once tested by betrayal and heartbreak, became a testament to resilience and forgiveness. And though the road had been rocky, they had emerged stronger, together.